Good afternoon or good morning, folks. Wherever you're joining us from, we're just waiting on a few more stragglers to come in now, so they're filing in accordingly. This presentation goes for about an hour. We're going to try and get through as much content. There is a fair bit that JB will run that through. And then hopefully at the end, if you have a couple of questions, you can certainly put those in the question box. We'll get those through and start to run through those. We'll try and get as many questions answered as possible. If you can stay on longer, then great. But long story short, we want to make sure that everyone gets as much value and time out of today. So just watching folks filter in now. So just give us a couple more minutes. I hope everyone's well and, certainly in a crazy time at the moment. The last 6 months, in a COVID bubble. We're all dealing with country invasions of Ukraine, inflation, interest rates and all those sort of things. We held a webinar yesterday. We ran through a bit of an end-of-year review, and I'll make that copy of that recording available to you guys as well too. We'll be recording this session. We'll be sending it out in the next 24 hours. So if you do need to go and re-watch that, then we want to make sure that you get as much time available. So I think we'll look at probably getting the show on the road. So just a few things here. And let's get this party started, as I say. So today, obviously, everyone's here for a reason. We're going to be talking about military super and the benefit scheme. There's quite a number of changes that have occurred in that scheme over a number of years. So myself and Jonathan, who's joining me today, will run through some of those changes and hopefully give you guys a bit of insight into how best to make decisions as an expat when you're managing your military super. No conversation from us would be required unless we had a disclaimer to keep our compliance officer Sam happy. Essentially what all this verbiage means is any information you hear from us today is for informational or entertainment purposes only, not that JB and I are much of entertainers. You should keep this as general information, and if you do want to receive personal advice, then by all means please reach out to a specialist like Atlas Wealth Management. Any questions that are asked in the end, they are personal questions. We will flag them as personal and try and answer them in a general way, but unfortunately we cannot provide personal advice on this forum. A bit about Atlas Wealth Management DIFC. We are a subsidiary of Atlas Wealth Management in Australia. We have two offices, Australian-based office that looks after Asia and the Americas, and the office here that Jonathan and I are in, Dubai, which looks after clients from Mumbai through to London down to Cape Town. We're a dual licensed firm. We have a license with the Dubai Financial Services Authority as well as ASIC back in Australia. Who is Atlas Wealth Management? We're the leading provider of Australian expat tax financial advice, and we've won lots of awards for that service. We don't do it for the awards, but it's always nice to be recognised. We're classified as a tax financial advisor with the Tax Practitioners Board back in Australia. We need to update that number because we've now got clients in approaching 45 countries. Some glamorous, some not so glamorous, but at the end of the day, they all have financial needs that we like to address. And all of our financial planners are degree qualified with numerous postgraduate certifications. Coming through on the agenda. So today we're going to be running through military super benefit scheme. What is it? Is it any good? Employee benefits, benefit flowchart, expat considerations, tax on benefits, run through a case study, and then open up the floor to the Q&A. So joining me today is my mate Jonathan Bonnet. Jonathan is a senior financial planner with Atlas. He has a very unique skill set in that not only is he a financial planner and obviously a specialist on the expat side, but he's also lived in Canberra and lived in this ecosystem that is government pensions. And mate, very proud to welcome you onto the webinar today.
Yeah, thanks, Brett. I was telling Brett before that I previously worked in Department of Defence, and I literally was across the partition from the people that built the MSBS in the late 80s, early 90s. So yeah, I do have a bit of a connection to it. Mind you, I had very little interest at the time in the MSBS, I can promise you that. So the MSBS is an interesting scheme in the sense that it was designed to replace the DFRDB scheme, which is a bit like the old CSS public service scheme, in that those schemes were defined benefit schemes that really rewarded people from lifelong commitments to one employer. And at the late 80s, early 90s, it was apparent to everybody that a lot of ADF members were serving for much shorter periods. And so the scheme was developed with the idea to, one, provide for shorter periods of enlistment with the ADF, and two, to encourage longer enlistments. And so essentially the scheme is what they call a hybrid scheme. And by a hybrid scheme, I mean it's part accumulation, which is what your normal public offer schemes are now, in that what grows is your contributions as a member, and part defined benefit, which is what your employer contributes based upon your salary, length of service, and if you like, final average salary. And there is something called ancillary benefits, which we're not really going to cover today, and they really relate to monies that come in from outside of the scheme or outside your employment. So the data from the scheme, I'm just going to run through quickly the data of the scheme, which just shows you what's happening with the MSBS and where it is in its, if you like, its life cycle. Because, you know, obviously the scheme's been closed since 2016, so it's actually in a period of winding down now. Let's have a look at the next slide. So you can see that this slide shows that the number of military super customers is actually just started to decline. And if you have a look, you can see the amount of preserved accounts has just started to drop off, contributors has dropped off, and pensioners are starting to increase, and that makes perfect sense. Member contributions, which are over 5 years, have just started to decline as well. And that's all logical given when the scheme was shut. Military super pension payments. Pension payments are increasing as members start to access benefits. And the same applies, of course, to the lump sum withdrawals. So you can see significant increase in lump sum withdrawals from the 2020 financial year onwards. There was some changes, and I think it was 2017 or 2019, in regard to some new invalidity classifications in the military super scheme. I actually know nothing about this, so I'm not going to even pretend, but the classifications as to invalidity members has changed, and you've got the numbers there. If you need advice about this, please don't ask me. I don't know anything about it whatsoever. Yeah, so the scheme, as I mentioned before, the scheme essentially has two types of benefits: an employer benefit and an employee benefit. The most interesting one's the employer benefit, because that's not your money. And effectively what it did was it accumulates an entitlement as a multiplier of final average salary. That final average salary is the last 3 years salary averaged on your, based upon your birthday as an anniversary date. And you can see for the first 7 years of enlistment, that accrues at 18%. And then for the next 13 years, it accrues at 23%. And after 20 years, it accrues at 28%. What does that look like? Well, we've got a calculator straight out of the military super book, and it shows that Sergeant McMillan, as a sample, resigns at 44. He's done 21 years. So the first 7 years, so 18% or 0.18 multiplied by 7 equals 1.26 times. 13 years at 23%, or 0.23 is 2.99 times, and 1 year at 28, so that's 0.28. So it's 4.53 times final average salary. His final average salary is $61,459 equals $278,409. Now, somewhat irritatingly, the Commonwealth Super Corporation have also been collecting 3% productivity components from the military. His contributions and interest equal $21,159. So that component goes towards that 278. So 257,250 is the unfunded component, which is either preserved in the scheme or gets converted to a pension if he chooses to take a pension benefit. So he can take it basically that component. That employer component is preserved in the scheme, can eventually be taken as a lump sum or a mixture of lump sum and pension. So at preservation age, at which is 55, he can access that, or at 60 and ceasing employment or changing employers. So yeah, it's an interesting dilemma that people have around this, because in a lot of cases you can take the benefit as you leave employment. So let's have a look at how this translates into the various benefit flowcharts. So if you're under 55 and you've reached statutory retirement age, and that's the age for rank, you can access your pre-99 member benefit paid as a lump sum, or you can roll that over into a preserved, or preserve it as a member benefit, roll it over to another scheme, or preserve it in the scheme. And the employer benefit less any surcharge debt. If you remember surcharge, there's still lots of people with surcharge debts, believe me, can be received as an index pension from that date, or preserved as an employer benefit in the MSBS. Now, these benefits that we're talking about here, member benefit pre-99 paid as a lump sum, rollover preserve post 30 June member benefits, or the employer benefit being paid as an index pension, will be familiar across all timeframes now. So between 55 and 59, the issues are whether you reach preservation age and can access your employee benefit. So your lump sum benefit, your member benefit, you can access if you've reached preservation age. Now I think preservation age, basically if you're 57 or 58, your preservation age is going to end up being 59 or 60. So, so if you're born in 1964, you're up at 59 years of age for preservation. And again, this 50% benefit. Now, all of this is going to become a bit clearer in a minute when we have a look at it, when we really start pull this apart to think about what options would benefit somebody who's living and working outside of Australia as a non-resident. So you can run through these flow charts and you can see the various benefits, and yes or no, if you've reached preservation age, you have to preserve that member benefit. If you haven't reached preservation age, you have to leave that member benefit in until you reach preservation age or 60. Same for retiring from the workforce. Over 60, you've got access to everything without any issues. The resignation benefit is much the same as a retirement benefit. So basically, pre-99 amount available as a lump sum, post-99 amount preserved to 60 or preservation age. Employer benefit must remain in a military super scheme until at least 55 on resignation. So there's a difference there. So what you came for today was to find out what makes military super something different for an expat. So the expat considerations are a little different and are quite interesting. So 55 years of age is where it becomes interesting, because it's the age that you can actually take some decisions and make some differences to the outcomes. So at 55, you can actually, if you weren't able to start a pension, by reaching age for retirement, for rank, and you resigned, you actually have access to the pension for 55 years of age. So you can start a full pension or a part pension. The key issues that expats, ex-ADF people have are the normal financial planning issues that we deal with expat clients. Now, I call them the 4 Ls. So where do you live and where do you want to live? Who do you love and who are your key relationships with and who do you want them to be with? What does your life look like and what's important in your life? And what sort of legacy do you want to leave behind? Because the decisions around full pension, part pension, all lump sum, or part lump sum, and whether to withdraw lump sum amounts and spend them on an expensive boat or flash cars, all of those questions start to be impacted from 55 years of age. There's one thing about these pensions, and this is the next slide on the on tax actually becomes sort of the key illustrator. If you take a full pension and you're a non-resident and you stay a non-resident for quite a long time, that unfunded pension, which is the employer benefit, is taxed on this 32.5 cents for the whole lot. So you can see that as a resident of Australia, you have a tax break from 0 to 18,000 and 19 cents in the dollar from 18,000 to $45,000. So the full no tax-free threshold, no 19% bracket whatsoever. It's 32.5 cents on every cent that's basically an untaxed component in your pension, which is the bulk of these defined benefit pensions, the employer component of these defined benefit pensions. So that's the key issue that that you really need to address and think about, because if you take a full pension and it's 120 grand, then that might be a bit of an issue tax-wise ongoing. So what is the tax on benefits? Now this is the standard chart it's from Commonwealth Super Corporation, as you can see at the bottom there. But this is the standard chart for any super scheme. So defined benefit pensions, you're going to get from preservation age to 59. Under preservation age, you pay marginal tax rate on those pensions. And if we've just seen, the marginal tax rate for a non-resident is 32.5% on the first 120,000, and then going up to 37% from 120 to 180,000 and 45% for over 180,000. So your marginal tax rate is going to apply to any pension under preservation age. At preservation age, you get a 15% rebate, and after preservation age, there's no tax on a taxed sourced pension, but on an untaxed source pension, you're getting marginal tax rates all through, and then marginal tax rates with a 10% tax offset. So it's a reasonably oppressive tax position to be in for a non-resident Australian. On lump sums, no big issue here, really. The real issue is you want to leave your lump sums or have them rolled over and not be drawing into them until you're after 60 years of age. So that's the key decisions that need to be made about pensions and lump sums. Lump sums are much more attractive. If you roll over and commence account-based pensions, there's some issues, and we're going to talk about that in our case study. So we've got a case study here, and meet Gary. So Gary's 50. Gary's completed 25 years in the Army, finished as a Lieutenant Colonel, has had a gutful. He is willing to live and work overseas, having recently divorced. So he's given away his family law act has basically divided their assets between him and his ex-wife. He elected to give away basically everything in order to keep his super. And this is why. Because his member component's $500,000, and obviously I've picked that number because it's an easy number to pick. But his employer component looks like this. So 7 years, 13 years, and then 5 years at the high 28% rate. So 7 years at 18%, 13 years at 23%, 5 years at 28%. His multiple of final average salary is 6.19. Final average salary is 200,000. And so his employer benefit is $1.238 million. Nice. So his decision at 50 is to preserve the benefit to 55. And if he does that, the employer component will grow only by CPI. Okay, so his this $1.238 million employer benefit grows by CPI. His member component, or his employee component, is invested and grows by the market returns. Okay, so we're going to look at what that looks like at 55. So at 55, his member component's grown to 782,000 because over the last 5 years he's got 9%. His employer component is now 1.4 million and it's grown at 2.5%, which is the average CPI over the last 5 years. And he's now got a job working at Dubai ports, and he's pulling $200,000 per annum for that gig. So his options at 55 are to convert part conversion of the employer component to a pension mode or full conversion. That pension will mostly be taxable, and he can roll over the member component, which is the 782,000, out of the military super scheme into a private or public offer scheme. Or he can roll over the entire 2.184 million, which is what his total combination of both those balances is worth, into a public offer scheme. Now there's some issues around that, and I'm going to explain that before we go too far. Now if he took the first option, and if he converted the employer component, he's going to collect a full pension of $127,454 per annum, CPI indexed for life. Now let's have a look. Let's have a look at the option 1. As we said, his pension benefit is $127,454 per annum. The tax on that as a non-resident taxpayer is $41,757. Net, he's going to collect $85,000. His Dubai income is the equivalent of 290,000 Australian dollars. So his income is going to be a pretty healthy $375,000. And his super is rolling along there at $782,000. The issues are that GAS could make some deductible contributions to super to mitigate some of that taxation. But GAS has got some issues. One is is divorced, so he doesn't have a home. So he wants to accumulate some cash and do the rest. So what we would suggest he would do, given that he's decided to take a full pension, is actually to invest the excess earnings here fairly aggressively into the market and see if we can build that up. Now, by my calculations, I've used the same numbers across all options, but by 60, his super will be, his 782,000 super will be worth 1.165 million. But that 10,000 a month at 8% is going to be 735,000 in an investment account. Now, when he hits 60, his tax burden drops a bit because he'll get a 10% rebate post 60 on the first 100,000 of untaxed liability components in that pension. So his tax will drop 31,000 per annum, which is a bit of a benefit, or a bit less nasty. If he rolls over to a lump sum, there's a tax issue here as well. In that member component, that member component, when the Commonwealth calculates it, is never set aside whilst you're serving. So in effect, it's an exercise in accounting. So when they send you the balance every year and say your member benefit is worth X dollars, it's a calculation. There is no money being set aside for it, apart from the 3% productivity component that's been set aside each year in that. So that's why these benefits are effectively untaxed deductible contributions as far as the Commonwealth Super Corporation is concerned. So if our member benefit's 1.402 million, he needs to pay 15% tax on that 1.402 million if he's to roll it over into a public offer scheme. Now the public offer scheme is the people that are going to receive that money, note that it's that type of component, and pay the $210,000 in tax to the ATO. So his member benefit's going to go from 2.184 million to 1.973 million. But that's a one-off tax liability. Once the tax is paid on the previously untaxed taxable component, it's permanently dealt with. At 60, his benefit is going to be, I said around 2 million. I think that should be a bit higher than that, to be honest. Yeah, his benefit will be well in excess. Yeah. Is that right?
Yeah, it'd be around about 2 million because if they're paying 15% tax on the 1.4 at age 55, 5 years with accumulation at a commensurate rate of return would bring it up to about 2 million.
Yeah, except I've missed out this 780,000 of member component.
Of course, yes.
Yeah, so it's going to be way more than that. It's going to be closer to 3 million. So you'll have an investment pool of over 3 million, so 3 or 3.5 million, which is about right if you think about it, because if our maximum pension pool on this side is 1.8 million, it's going to be more. It's going to be closer to $3 million, not $2 million. And so the interesting thing about this is and if you think about it, that $210,000 worth of tax is 5 years worth of the pension tax. So it's one of those things you've got to really weigh up. The certainty of that pension income versus the flexibility and value of capital is the key issue. Now, option 3 is the hybrid solution that people can actually exercise, which is if you take half the pension, and you need to take at least half to take a part pension, you must take at least 50% of the employer component. Tax on half would be $21,000 or thereabouts. He's still got his $290,000 a year Dubai salary, so he's on $333,000. His super accumulation valuation is 1.768 million, and that's taken on the reduced after-tax component too, because when you roll over the member component that's been contributed to the public offer fund, they're going to take 15% on that, but it's simply half. So the amount here was 210, so it'll be 105 that's coming out of that. Again, Gary can make some small deductible contributions to mitigate some of that tax. He's completely tapped out in making what we call undeducted contributions because he's in breach of the total superannuation benefit cap. But by 60, his benefit will be over $2 million, and with his savings component, he should have somewhere between 2.3, 2.5 million. So you can see in terms of capital value, the lump sum rollover gives you a higher capital value, being 3 million or more, but the other benefits, the pension benefits, are not there. You have to fund your pension from the capital value once you stop working, and that's the trade-off that that people have to make. So the key issue for ADF people when they're overseas is just figuring out whether the high tax rate erodes the long-term value of those pensions, and whether a part pension or all lump sum options are what's appropriate. Now, the other thing about Gary's case is that he's not married. He's got no financial dependents. So if a ship drops on him in Dubai ports and he's killed, his pension dies with him. So there's no conversion factor, no reversionary pensioners with the MSBS defined benefit pensions. Now, this actually does matter, because I had clients in Canberra, one client in Canberra who was not a PSS, not an MSBS scheme, he was a PSS scheme, who actually had a wife who was 30 years younger than he was. So the pension made perfect sense because she's going to be a reversionary pensioner as long as she's married to him before he dies. She'll maintain that access to that reversionary pension. My father was military, so my mum's obviously a reversionary pensioner. Now that's DFRDB, but those schemes are the same in the sense of access to these reversionary pensions.
So JB, just a question, just to explain to the folks out there. Let's go through a scenario. Gary starts a pension, full pension,
Yep.
age 65, as you say, boat drops on him or he gets wiped out by a Land Cruiser on Shakeside Road. If he were to be holding these funds in a public offer fund, retail fund, as opposed to
Yep.
military, even if he's not married, what's the difference between those two?
Well, the trustees of the super fund would determine who would get it. Now, typically trustees run for cover, so they basically send it to the members' estate.
Yep.
So it goes via the will. So it becomes an estate planning issue. Yeah.
Yeah. So that balance just passes straight on to whoever Gary's nominated in his will as a beneficiary, as opposed to the military pension that something happens to him, it's gone. That whole but the whole benefit, that's all gone.
Yeah, and it really is one, because I've dealt with Canberra stories. I've dealt with people in Canberra that went all lump sum, even from schemes like PSS scheme and a couple MBS schemes, because they believed they had low life expectancy and they were single, devoted smokers. They figured that they were going to die. Yeah, that's right. They figured they were definitely going to die at 70 or 75, and there was no longevity in the family, and there was high incidence heart disease. They would always convert to lump sum and go from there.
And also, I think it's an interesting one too with that whole lump sum tax thing, because to me it is the government almost doing a bit of a furphy to members. Because they're saying, here's your benefit. Actually, no, it's not. You need to take 15% off that. Whereas if you're holding money in a retail scheme, the 15% comes off before it goes in. Yeah. And what you are seeing is actually your numbers. And this is a good example of why in the Howard days they set up the Future Fund, all these unfunded government pensions, because everyone's going to start drawing on these defined benefit pensions, and there's no money behind the scheme to fund it. So,
and the dividends. The dividend that the Future Fund pays to the government each year is now substantial. It's in the vicinity of $2 billion plus. And a lot of Australians believe the Future Fund is some sort of sovereign scheme. It's not. It's actually to pay you guys your defined benefit pensions, as well as public servants and politicians and judges. So they're the
general Australians that don't benefit. So, and just guys, while I'm just talking to JB about this, now's a good time to start getting your questions in. As I said, we can't answer personal questions, but by all means, if you have general questions or specific questions, please start putting those into the questions field as well too, because what's going to happen is, we can try and provide some. It's very difficult for us in the space for now to give you all the information. So if you do have that burning question you've always wondered about military super, now's the time to start putting those questions in. JB, another question that a lot of folks, and a lot of our clients actually do, or they grapple with is, there's obviously the employee benefit and the employer benefit.
Yep.
And let's be honest, military super as from a functional point of view, from a ability to manage your assets point of view, is incredibly poor. There's virtually two options. Invest a little bit of it or go to cash. You don't have that flexibility. So someone coming out, say, in their 30s or 40s, who've done, let's call it 10, 12 years, would have a reasonable sort of employee benefit of that. Can they take that out of military super and invest it in a retail fund where they do have more options, do have more flexibility, but it's also they're bitten the bullet on the tax, and they can actually start to develop from there.
Yeah, it's actually interesting because the rules vary depending upon the nature of your departure. So effectively, if you reach age for retirement and you've done how they have these different ages for different levels, because I think my father's was 50 or 51 as a lieutenant colonel, which is why I made Gary 50. If you reach age for retirement, you can actually roll over your member component at that age. But if you haven't, then it's a resignation. You must leave it in the scheme until 55. And that's why I say 55 is like the bellwether. It's the ring a bell. You've got some decisions to make. You need to look at where your benefits are and what you can do with them at 55. And so 55 is the wake-up call, first time to have a look, and then you'll be planning what you're going to do between 55 and 65 in terms of whether you start pension or part pension at 55, or you're going to roll a whole lot over at 55 into a public office scheme and let us and let people like us, do some different things. The interesting thing about the investment options inside the military super scheme is they're not that cheap anymore. I mean, they used to be probably when they were set up, but the industry fees have come down a lot, and so
it's been like a reverse, isn't it? It's got sort of one's gone down and one's gone up in concentric ways.
Yes, yeah, it is. It's quite strange that they haven't actually tried to keep up at all with that. We used to have clients, again, Canberra story. We used to have clients come into the office because the Commonwealth Super Corporation have got a pension scheme now, like an account-based pension scheme. And we'd show them their costs versus our costs, and the people go, well, why on earth would you ever use them? And it's kind of true. I don't think they've been very successful in accumulating assets, but it's pretty expensive. Yeah, it's quite surprising. I was going to say, yeah, there's some, there's some options that are available to other schemes that aren't available to the military super scheme. So I was thinking through that, but they're not available.
Yeah, look, and there's other things as well, and we can run through that on later points. Obviously participating in franking credits and all those things would offset that 50% income tax and stuff like that. So we've got some questions rolling in now, so we'll start running through. Question from Anita: can you please dot point summarise the key differences between taking an MSBS as a resident versus an expat?
Yes. So MSBS as an expat is the high marginal tax rate on pensions.
So just to explain to me that you don't get the tax-free threshold. So when you...
No tax-free threshold, no 19 cents in the dollar. Yep. You get no 19 cents dollar threshold. You're at 32.5% for the entire benefit up to obviously 120,000.
Yep. So and that's the big one, I think.
That's the big one.
Yeah. I mean, virtually if you work out what that translates to, virtually a third of your money is going as an expat, as opposed to as a non-resident. Half is free and half is, and we're talking about around about $50,000 a year. Half is free and half you're only paying 19% on. So
yes, right. And in fact, the pensions between, if you're sitting as a tax resident of Australia, pensions in that sort of $40,000 to $60,000 are almost tax free after 60. Which changes that decision about how much pension you take. In fact, we used to set pensions up to be tax free. In that determining how much of the member benefit or the employer benefit should be converted to pension, we'd actually make sure after 60 they were going to be tax free, which is very difficult to do if you're a non-resident taxpayer.
Yeah, when you're paying 32.5 cents on the first dollar, so not the most pleasant of experiences. Yeah, and then actually just sort of to elaborate on more what JB was saying and to answer Anita as well too, the one thing I will caveat this with as well is this is if you are a non-tax resident. So for those folks out there who are a tax resident, so living overseas, then that's different. So you can be living out of the country and be a tax resident of Australia in a foreign country. Or if you're working on a project that is tax-free as well. So that's the other consideration as well. So what JB ran through was a vanilla person working for Dubai Ports. There's no link to Australia from a project basis or those sort of things. But if you are living overseas, and we don't really see, actually I've never seen any clients who have elected to be a tax resident of the UAE, tax resident of Australia from the UAE. But if you are in a country that, say, has a reasonably high tax rate, like the United States or the UK, that changes the story a little bit there as well. Just got another question here from Mark. Given changes in rules around qualifying as a non-resident, 45-day rule, would it be possible to revert to being a resident again, assuming you meet whatever the rules are around that? Actually, Mark, there you go. Great minds think alike. So we just covered on that. You can elect to do that. The only time we tend to see clients really consider doing that is if you are a holder, like let's say, a significant property portfolio back in Australia, because then you can benefit from the 50% capital gains discount, from the time that you become a tax resident, which if your property portfolio is making a lot of money, then 100%, that could be the case as well too.
And in fact, I'm working on a white paper about Australians potentially being, if you like, non-doms, but not domiciled anywhere, but actually which defaults your tax residency back to Australia. And it kind of makes a lot of sense for people over the age of 60, especially if they're not working. So retirees over the age of 60, if your asset base is in Australia and you don't necessarily want to live in Australia, you can live anywhere in the world and essentially set yourself up as a non-domicile Australian. For that very reason, it's the tax advantages for superannuation over the age of 60 are enormous. Now, we didn't actually talk about this, but the lump sum, that rolling over that entire lump sum, basically Gary would have been able to commence a pension at 60 with 1.7 million of his entire benefit. Now the minimum drawdown on that is 4% or 5%. It's actually 4%. So he could have run it at 4% to 65, 5% from 65 to 75. And that's a minimum amount. It's entirely tax-free. So no capital gains tax, no income tax.
Whether you're resident or non-resident too, I should point that out. So super is agnostic to residency, so you can actually draw on that as a tax-free income regardless of what country you're in. Now, I will put the caveat there, you need to check the DTA in your country, because if you're in, say, France, that's not the case. If you're in UAE, that is the case.
Yeah. So there's opportunities around one, non-domiciles, and two, just using super as the key investment vehicle if you're living overseas.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, whether you go for an all-in pension, a part pension with a structured approach, or pay the piper, pay the 15% tax, take that lump sum, then you have control, then you have legacy, down the track as well too, which a lot of people don't realise. Reversionary pensions and all those sort of things, they can be a very powerful tool. But also too, being able to pass money in testate to other parties is a very important part of that as well too. So certainly the big thing for us that we always like to go through is the what if scenarios. We don't think of when times are good, we think of when times are bad and what the best outcome will be if you are going through that worst possible time. So, and just to expand on to Mark there too, at the moment, Mark, the 45-day rule isn't in place. So just as an update there, we've been doing a lot of work in the background. Long story short, it was proposed by Canberra in May last year. Labor did in principle agree with the requirement to update the legislation. Nothing has happened yet. It's been tumbleweeds in terms of what's going on. Obviously, we have a new government in power now. Labor depends on how quickly they get their feet under the desk and how quickly they get settled in, whether they take the Board of Taxation's 2019 report at face value and just run with that. Also depends on what Treasury and Finance have done in the background as well too on their consultations. So as an update, there is no legislation, there is no change yet. Obviously you're at the 23rd of June today, so nothing's going to happen in the next 7 days. So this financial year is a free kick. As far as next financial year, which kicks off 1 July next week, then at the moment Labor can't tell us whether they're going to be sitting in July or August. At that point, then if there is legislation ready to go, they may present that to the House of Reps. Now, that stuff doesn't happen quickly. There's a lot of other bills they've got to consider. So it may take a couple of months to go through. Obviously, Canberra doesn't sit over Christmas. So then once it gets passed through the House of Reps, it has to go through to the Senate, the upper house. And at that point, they vote on that. And then if the House of Reps and Senate have voted it through, then obviously it receives royal assent. So it's the better part of a 6-month endeavour if they're rushing to get this legislation through.
I'd be very surprised if we didn't see it until 2024.
Yeah. Oh, look, I think you're right. And they did announce that they're going to do their own mini budget September, October this year. And at that point, that's where I think we will see further information that becomes available. So essentially, obviously, every May, well, except for this year, it was March, but May of every year, federal government does a budget. Labor's got to do their own one later this year, as if they were in power back early to change their policy decisions. So we are going to hopefully start to see a bit of feedback going on there. In the meantime, what we're trying to do is, in the background, we've applied for a government petition through Canberra. That goes through a vetting process with petitions committees. None of it occurs until Parliament is sitting. So right now, the application's been sent. We're still waiting on that. Long story short, we hope to hear July, August, whether that petition's been approved. If and when it is approved, we have 4 weeks to get as many signatures as possible. As far as us, we're putting forward a number of arguments as to why a number of changes need to be made. Our biggest argument is that there's an equitable treatment of Australian citizens overseas for citizens living in countries that don't have a double taxation agreement, that don't have a tiebreaker clause to rely upon. So the experience that we have in Dubai or UAE, Saudi, those countries that, Hong Kong's another one, it's very different to those who reside in Singapore, United States, UK. So we've requested that they amend the 45 to a 90. We want an exclusion for returning during times of pandemic or war. We want an exclusion for family visits due to sickness or health. We want an exclusion for business trips if you are travelling back to Australia for work. And last of all, and something that no one's really mentioned, an exclusion for those attending boarding school. Because what people forget is there wasn't enough detail to say whether that would be the case. And obviously, if you breach that 45 days and your son or daughter is in boarding school in Australia, then you fail the family factor test. So there's a lot of that going on. I've just put the our social media pages up on the screen there, so I encourage you to follow us on your favourite channel of choice, because once we get a bit of traction on this, and we've only got 4 weeks, and we want to be pretty grandiose in terms of how many signatures we need to get these changes put through. So definitely love to encourage everyone to have a go and have a look at our channels and just like and follow those, so that when we do get the nod from Canberra, we can hit the ground running. Just quickly doing any other questions out there from the folks. Now's the time to ask more so JB than myself. I said JB's the guru when it comes to this sort of stuff, and he's forgotten more than I know. Anita saying, thanks guys, got to run. Thank you very much, Anita, for joining us on the call. We are obviously going to record this session. Not everyone can attend a midday session. There's a lot going on with 30 June for us, which is one of the reasons why we're running it at a midday, but we are recording this, so that will be going out to folks. I guarantee that these sort of scenarios is going to create 1,000 more questions. So I'd like to invite you to visit our website at atlaswealth.com. There you can click on the Contact Us page, fill in your details, and then we can organise a time to meet up and virtually or physically and answer your questions. Mark's has come back here saying, yeah, maintaining non-resident status if 45-day rule comes in, especially if you own property, is tough. Thanks for the presentation. My pleasure, mate. Look, it is 45 days is nonsense. When a tourist can enter Australia for longer periods, our biggest argument was that being in Australia for 45 days doesn't show enduring ties. We've got clients who go to Europe for greater than 45 days. Doesn't mean they're a European resident. We completely agree, and we think that the 45 days should be amended to 90 like it is with all other countries like New Zealand, UK. There should be a standardised date in that regard. So Graham's has come on. Thanks for this. Pretty useful information. My pleasure, Graham. Obviously, JB and I, we love to do this sort of stuff because it's informed decisions. It's between a good result and a great result can be that flick of the pen, and unfortunately, we see it on a daily basis. People having good intentions, but unfortunately not knowing the outcomes, and then we get to work. So, all right, guys. Well, I think we'll wrap it up there, unless there's any other questions coming through. Once again, we'll be sending out a copy of the presentation, copy of the recording via email in the next 24 to 48 hours. If you do have any questions, don't be a stranger. Feel free to get in contact, and hopefully we can be of assistance. So, JB, I think we'll leave it there, mate, and let everyone get on with their day.
Excellent. Thanks, guys. Cheers.
Thanks, guys. Take care.